objects.
Really?
Green.
I put it up against another.
If
And then,
Yeah, I remember.
It was characteristics, not even the shape.
negative.
Mentally ill. Did a special effects agency. Welcome back to the Clerc podcast show. We have a great guest for you today. Somebody who is a expert in the field of artificial intelligence, and among that, other things as well. But that is one of the things we really wanted to get into tonight. We have Professor at the University of Missouri, Scott Christianson, with us tonight. So great to have you, Scott.
Thank you for having me. The cold night, but I would nothing I'd like to do more than be talking about AI in the future.
Heck yeah, this is awesome. I'm excited to have you. And I mean, one of the first things we should get into is what, first of all, led you to be interested in AI? I mean, where did you find that? Was that something that came to you when you were younger, or as technology has developed in recent times, is that something that you just find yourself getting involved with?
Sure. Well, I ran my own technology business prior to joining the University of Missouri as a teaching professor. So in that business, we always had to be looking ahead as to what's going to be coming down the pike, what's really going to be influencing technology, what's going to be influencing our industry. And 5 years ago, I'd be talking to you about blockchain and a couple other technologies like Internet of Things. But it's really become clear in this last 5 years that artificial intelligence, namely in the form of what we call machine learning, is really going to have a dramatic impact over a number of different industries and organizations. So I really became interested just in the recent years about how this tool might be used or might be misused in some instances by organizations, and what effect is it going to have on us as a society when this AI gets distributed out more and more?
And before we get too deep into it, I think it'd be important for us to define some of the things we're talking about, because a lot of people here don't have very much knowledge on these things. So can you kind of define for us some of the terms we're going to be using a lot tonight? Artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things. Can you kind of go over that for people?
Sure. Well, some people classify these all as technologies that are part of the fourth industrial revolution. So this idea that we have these new technologies that are really game changers and are not just isolated to big companies. You and I can have access to AI. You and I can have access to 3D printing. You and I can have access to cryptocurrencies, to blockchain. So they really are in some ways different from previous technologies in that they're very democratized, right? So they're spreading rapidly. They're actually sitting on the backbone of current technologies such as cloud computing and the internet. And so are just being distributed very rapidly. So AI, that's a kind of an umbrella term for any sort of machine or device that can make a decision. So this could be from your Roomba, which is a little vacuum, right? That is pretty stupid, but it knows it ran into a wall, and so it turns around. And so it made a little decision there that, oh, I hit a wall, I'm going to go ahead and turn around. It can go all the way to things that we see in the movies, right? So we see these, intelligent machines, whether it be something malevolent like the Terminator, or whether it's something that is more endearing type of intelligence like Wall-E or something like that. But that's the kind of what we call general intelligence. So it acts like a human. It can almost work in lots of different domains. But really what a lot of the concentration is on right now is something called machine learning. And that's where we have machines or computers that are set up in a way that they can learn. And what's really cool about this is you can feed these algorithms or feed these computers lots of data, and they will generate kind of an algorithm that will be able to make predictions. So a really easy application of this is something called image classification. So if we want to know what a McDonald's cup looks like versus a Burger King cup, all we have to do is feed a bunch of different images to the AI of a McDonald's cup versus a Burger King cup. And now we have something that can classify what kind of cup it is. And that's very different than 10, 20 years ago, where if we wanted a computer to be able to do that, we'd have to sit down and do all the programming ourselves. We'd have to think, okay, well, this one has a little bit of yellow on it, and this one has this, and this one has this. So it really makes it very easy to quickly have a computer learn how to do certain things, but they are very limited. So that's kind of AI, and it varies from very simple things to what we haven't yet seen yet in terms of general intelligence. But mainly what we're talking about is something called machine learning. We talk about Internet of Things. That's just smart, cheap little micro processors. I'm trying to see if I have one. Well, here's a little tiny one right here. This is a little tiny device that I'm holding up. It looks like maybe a little bit bigger than a stick of gum, but this would actually do an EKG on me. So I can actually put their leads here, and I can put the other lead on my ankle, and it will do an EKG of my heart.
Really?
And this is a really simple little microprocessor in here that collects the data. It then sends it to my phone and out to the cloud. So then you can do some more analysis. So that's what we call Internet of Things.
Wow.
And then you mentioned blockchain. That's another technology. Of course, a lot of people know its association with things such as Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So cryptocurrencies, but it is actually has some really great applications outside of that. So accounting firms are really looking at this because what it is a distributed ledger that can't be altered. So it's a spreadsheet, if you will, that can never be altered and is not contained by one central authority.
So for we're going back to the machine learning. This is different than AI in the way that machine learning is constantly growing in gigabytes worth of knowledge or terabytes worth of knowledge, whereas artificial intelligence is something that is set from the beginning. Is that kind of the difference, or are they very similar?
No, I would say artificial intelligence is kind of an umbrella term.
Okay.
Which has lots of things underneath it. And so machine learning is one form of artificial intelligence.
Where are we seeing that being used then in modern applications, machine learning? Is this like your Google Alexa, your Google Home, your Alexa, where it's learning your voice, it's learning what you do, what you say, and is it kind of building a profile? Is that where you're going with machine learning?
Yeah, so that's one great example. So machines that can actually understand my voice, translate that into words, and then even go farther and translate that into sentiment. What do I really mean by those words? And as AIs get more data, they can learn better and better. For example, an AI, when it first starts out, may not understand the use of the term sunset in different contexts. So normally we would say that's a beautiful sunset. But I might also ask you, when does the contract on this real estate sunset? Well, that means when does it expire?
Yeah.
Or when does this law sunset? Well, that's a different use. And so AI may eventually learn that, but it may not learn it right off the bat. So AIs can be great at some things, right? So if you're using things in kind of the most normal or the most common form, they can be great at it, but then they can run a little bit off the rails when we have these unusual uses. Another one that I always like to cite is medical stuff, because if you think about radiologists and cardiologists, their main job is pattern recognition. So they're really good at recognizing patterns. Well, that's a great job for a machine learning application. And in fact, there's 50 machine learning algorithms that have already been approved for human use in the US.
Really?
And these can be from looking at x-rays. So if I think I might have pneumonia tonight, I go into the ER and they take an x-ray of me. They may run it through one of these algorithms, and the algorithm will be as good or better, and certainly faster than a radiologist at being able to say, Scott doesn't have pneumonia, or yes, he does have pneumonia, or there's a 90% chance he does. And so that's another example of how this technology is being used.
And that leads us to an important point, because we're talking about a machine taking someone's job. And that is probably a question you get asked a lot. Do you see in the future AI and all these different technologies that are coming forward actually getting people fired or getting their jobs taken away because we just don't need them anymore. Why do you need a human when a machine can do it accurate and they can do it again and again and again?
Right. And you don't need, I don't need a machine learning algorithm here and also one in Minnesota, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can have the same one handle everybody.
Yep.
So that's another issue. It's controversial.
It is, yeah.
So some people think that what is going to happen is that doctors will learn how to work alongside AI. There's a really good author. His name is Eric Topol, and he wrote a book called Deep Medicine. I would highly recommend that to you and your listeners to go check it out at the library. And he talks about how AI is being used in medicine and how it will be used. And his idea and his hope is that doctors will become less technicians and more cued into kind of the emotional intelligence, right? So the AI is diagnosed that Scott has this particular malady. Now, the radiologist maybe gets to know Scott a little bit better, knows more about his history. Will he really respond to this treatment? Is he emotionally prepared to deal with the difficulties of this treatment? So his idea is this is going to shift and doctors will work alongside AIs. And it's been proven out in some other fields that this is the best case where you have an AI and a human working together. So you may remember that a machine learning algorithm beat Gary Kasparov in the chess, right? So
really?
was able to beat a human in chess, but they found out that really the best chess players were what they call centaurs, which are really humans paired with machine learning algorithms, because the machine learning algorithms can do all the pattern recognition and statistics, and the humans can kind of understand like, oh yeah, but Ethan usually plays this way, and, here's his strategy, and oh, Scott plays this way, so we're going to shift a little bit this way. And so it's very interesting, and some people are very concerned with this. And so you may have seen Andrew Yang was a presidential candidate that was around, and he proposed that because all this AI is happening, we may need something like a universal basic income. So how are we going to deal with these jobs that get dispersed? Some people think, well, there's just going to be different jobs are going to be created. So it's very controversial. And Kao-Fu Lee is another good author. He worked at Google for a number of years, wrote a book called AI Superpowers, which is also a good introduction to AI. And he proposes the same sort of thing, that we may have to start compensating people for other types of work. So you're taking care of your mother, you're taking care of your parents. Maybe that's the type of work we need to compensate you for, because you're not going to have a job working as an AI. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We're starting to see autonomous cars deployed. And I think this whole COVID stuff has really accelerated things to an enormous degree. It's really jumped us ahead like a decade. And I think we're going to see autonomous trucks, and that's 3 million US jobs that are fairly well paying. You can make a good middle class income as a truck driver. Are those truck drivers going to be able to transition to being AI programmers? I don't know. So
that's tough.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. My dad works as a machinist for many years, and he, you think about previous revolutions going from the farm to the factory, that wasn't probably quite as big of a jump, but going, especially if you're an old fogey like me in my 50s, well, if I had to go from what I'm doing now to learning a whole new career, I think that'd be fairly difficult, right?
Do you think, should we say that we're getting to like the level of like iRobot, like Will Smith, like robots are going to take over? Do people need to be afraid of technology, or should people adapt and grow and find the positives of using it? Because in today's society, it's so easy to find negatives, but people should really look for the positives of the technology that is coming forward and figure out, like you said, how we can work together with it instead of fighting it, because it's here and it's only going to get better. So I feel like there's no point in trying to not grow with it, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is guide the future, right? So the future is what we make of it. It isn't preordained. So we need to get in there and have more discussions like this about, well, how do we want that AI to look like? What do we want it to be able to do? One of the examples I often bring up with my students is, should I have AI grade your papers? Because
Oh,
grading papers is a royal pain in the butt,
oh yeah.
right? So, and why don't I just have this AI look at all the people I gave A's to in the past, all the people I gave B's to and C's to, and even F's to, and then just take your paper and use that pattern recognition to say, well, sorry, Ethan, you got a C minus on
Yeah.
this. But what if you're the next Truman Capote, or you're the next Mark Twain? You know, you've got a new style of writing that has never been seen before. Well, you're going to get an F, right? Because it doesn't match the previous patterns.
Yeah.
So there's certain areas we should apply AIs. Medicine would be a great one. Anything that's, pattern recognition, these kind of technical applications, that's where we should first see them. But we should be kind of wary when we start to say, this requires a little human judgment, requires a little, expert judgment, a little bit of a human eye toward it, right?
Will we ever get to the point where robots can develop emotions and morals and things that humans we have from like relationships and experiences? Will robots ever get to that level where they can genuinely, show that? You think we'll get there?
Well, that's also a big debate, right? So there's a guy, Alan Turing, may have heard the Turing test, it's been in several movies, and was whether a machine was intelligent. Now, he said that an AI or a computer may produce art and symphonies, but they may be art and symphonies that only other computers would like, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's a different type of consciousness than what humans are.
Yeah.
So I tend to be a skeptic on that. And maybe once again, it's because I'm an old fuddy-duddy. But the more I get into learning about machine learning, the more I see it's very kind of narrow.
Yeah.
So you can't take that machine learning algorithm that knows about how to predict pneumonia in a person and say, well, tell me if GE stock is going to go up tomorrow, right? So it doesn't translate that way. So I find that machine learning in a lot of these applications are excellent, and the excellent ones are very narrow. And you start to look at things like Alexa and these different devices. They seem to be somewhat limited, right? So we thought that they were going to be at a human level intelligence by now when they first came out, but it seems they kind of plateaued, right? And so I think that's part of the deal is they're very good at certain things. So telling you the weather, telling you the news, doing some searches for you. But when it gets outside of the normal range or trying to integrate different thinking, that's more difficult.
And the other part about that with the Alexa and the Google Home, you hear all the time that about privacy concerns, about having these devices, and maybe you know more about it. Are they always listening in your home and they are always recording everything that's going on? And then whenever you actually say the phrase that turns it on, does it go back or whatever? Because I'm assuming to catch you saying that, it has to be recording 24/7. It has to always be on in the background. Is that correct?
Right. So it's always on. And in fact, I'm not going to use the example that starts with a G because I have one here in my little studio.
Oh, yeah.
But those devices are on all the time and they're listening. They do sample. So, for example, Apple said that they do sample from the Siri application, but they try to randomize or anonymize rather the data from that, and it's just to try to make their system better. But I think it's a little bit we should be a little bit wary of that, right? And so there's a lot of people that report that they talk about something at the dinner table and the next day they start to see ads for that. Now that could be just confirmation bias, that we're seeing something that confirms our belief, or it could be true. And so there's always this kind of balance between creepy and convenient. So each of us has that line, right? So you may decide that it's in one place and I may decide it's in another place. There's actually some interesting stuff you can do with listening to people's voices. So Amazon has a new fitness tracker, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but this fitness tracker actually has a microphone in it that's always on. Now, it's not, you can't order stuff from Amazon via that microphone, but what it does is it analyzes your voice to figure out if you're agitated, if you're angry, if you're happy, or if you're depressed.
Really?
Right. So you can actually predict suicidal or self-harm tendencies based on voice. So there's been some scientific data behind that. Now, that might be good for Scott if Scott wears one of those and you say, okay, well, let's alert his family members because it sounds like he's getting pretty depressed here. But that also kind of creeps over to that creepy line too, right?
Yeah. That's interesting
So
right there, actually, because you could, I don't know how far it'll go, but could it be set to calling the police and they show up at your door and you didn't even call, but Google alerted them that you're getting a little angry, or Amazon, whatever, alerted them you're getting a little angry, you know?
right. Right. And so what right do we have for our own agency, right? So do we have the right to get depressed? You know,
That's a tough one.
and it's, yeah, once again, it's all these areas that it kind of creeps over, and it also creeps over depending on where you are in the situation. So another scenario I give my students is, what about using AI in war? Why don't we hook this AI up to a machine gun and it can, figure out who to kill on the battlefield? Well, they generally think that's pretty bad, right? Okay, well, now what if your daughter is in the Army and is going to be on the front lines? Do you want an AI along with your daughter? Well, wait a second. Now the scenario's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I think we have a lot of ethical issues we have to deal with, and we got to start talking about these things. So I'm with you. I'm optimistic about the future, but I think we have to start to have these discussions. Where do we want humans involved, and where should we turn things over to an AI, and where should we, not?
Yeah, and well, I mean, because you've been involved with this for quite some time now, I can only imagine, and you've probably, we're young guys here, so we haven't seen the whole progression of it. But going from like the '90s to now has got to just be an insane jump. Because I mean, now we have smart locks, Amazon Dash buttons, smart doorbell, smart fridge, smart dishwasher, smart TV. The Roomba thing. I've even heard they have one for your lawn that you can put out. It'll mow your lawn like a Roomba. So, I mean, to jump from back then to now is just unbelievable at the stuff we have. And also, like you said, where does it get a little creepy? Because they know everything about us. These companies know everything about us, what we eat, what we're doing, what we're saying. It's how do you fix that, or not fix it, but how do you not cross the line between convenient and creepy, but still make progress going forward? Because it's only going to get crazier, I bet.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like I said, things seem to be moving faster and faster all the time. I think things are changing more rapidly than when I was in college, certainly. Part of that is what we call Moore's Law, where computers get faster, processors get faster about every 2 years. But we also add in the internet, cloud computing, all these other technologies that are just accelerating the pace of change. And there's some great things from that. So if the three of us decided that we wanted to start a business tonight, we had a great idea for a website and we needed some servers and stuff like that. We wouldn't have to go get a loan or mortgage our house or anything like that. We would just get out a credit card and we would spin up some servers at AWS, the Amazon Web Services, and we could have our app up and running tonight. So it's really lowered the barriers to entry. So I tell my students, this is a great time to be starting a business, to be thinking entrepreneurial, because all these technologies, while they can be pretty bewildering and a little bit overwhelming, they've also created huge opportunities.
Where do you see the negatives with AI? Because I read on your thing, on the podcast guest thing, that you were talking about AI is being used by humans to manipulate other humans. Can you kind of explain where you're going with that?
Well, a good example would be Facebook. So if you look at Facebook, a bunch of humans, not some malevolent Skynet AI, but a bunch of humans that are basically using their platform and implementing machine learning on that platform to keep engagement. right? So that machine learning algorithm that is behind Facebook is not there to promote civic dialogue. It's there to promote time on site. Well, what's going to keep me on the site more? I read about, everything's going fine, things are going well, or I read about something that agitates me, that makes me angry, that makes me want to share it, that gets me upset, that makes me want to write an editorial or post something. Well, that's going to keep me on the site. So I would also recommend a good Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma.
I watched that. Pretty crazy stuff.
And if you remember, one of the guys in there talks about how he's more valuable to Facebook if he's agitated, if he's angry.
Yep.
Right. And so that's one of the problems with these algorithms being used in social media, being used, in ways that aren't really transparent to us. We don't really even know all the data Facebook has on us and how they're using that data.
Can the government get involved with Facebook as it's being as a private company? I know this is up for debate right now, but can Facebook get involved, or not Facebook? Can the government get involved with Facebook and say, what you guys are doing is a violation of, I don't know what laws there are out there, but because Facebook is a private company, when we sign up for it, are we just pretty much throwing out everything and going by their book, by their code of rules that they do?
Oh, well, we regulate private companies all the time. The local factory here, the Gates Belt factory, can't just pour stuff into the stream. They can't just pollute the environment. They can't exploit their workers and keep them there 24 hours a day and lock the doors. There's lots of ways in which we regulate private industry. So it's just whether our Congress people have the will and the fortitude to do so. And so it's also part about shaping our future. And one thing is, Facebook is a monopoly. They not only own Facebook, they own WhatsApp and Instagram. Those mergers probably should never have been done, in my opinion. And I think a lot of these monopolies we need to break up, and not only because maybe they're bad for people, but also because we're capitalists, right? And because we want competition.
Yeah.
And right now there's not a lot of competition out there. And so I think that's something that we need to see. As an entrepreneur, I'm kind of discouraged by the fact that the number of startups and new businesses are at kind of an all-time low right now. The height was in the 70s. So we've kind of lost that entrepreneurial spirit, and instead we have these giant companies. And I think that certainly we can regulate them however we choose to. It's our country. It's they exist as corporations by the governments allowing them to be corporations. So,
yeah, I think it's just difficult when the Congress, I don't know what the average age of a Congress person is, but you have all these old people that probably don't even understand Facebook. Like I know my grandma, she goes on Facebook a lot, but she doesn't understand like all the different intricacies of it. And I'm sure the Congress people are the same way. A lot of
watch those hearings. It's so embarrassing. It is so embarrassing.
It is. And they're questioning Mark Zuckerberg and they're questioning Jack Dorsey, and it's like they don't even know what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Well, they asked Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, something about an Apple iPhone, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't make that." You're gonna have to call Tim Cook and ask him about that. So,
why don't we have? Why isn't there special, technologist specialists there that are making these questions or decisions? Why do we have? It just blows my mind sometimes that the government operates the way it does, and there hasn't been a change with the technology. The people and the systems we've had in place for so long haven't really changed that much. It's the same complacency we've had for however many years now.
Yeah, government was in some ways designed to be slow, and there's some good aspects to that. But we didn't really understand the threat that these companies had. So if you think about just 4 or 5 years ago, we really didn't understand the threat and how it was changing our society. And these things kind of creep up onto us, and then all of a sudden you've got this huge monster you have to deal with. Now, we've dealt with monsters in the past. We broke up, steel companies and railroad companies and other monopolies in the past. So it's not like we can't slay these monsters.
Mm.
And I do think it is something that we see some bipartisan agreement on. My senator, Josh Hawley, is I don't know if I call him anti-Facebook, but he's definitely questioned these technology companies. He comes from it from a different angle than some of the Democratic senators, but there is some agreement that there's something wrong here, and there needs to be more questioning about it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And it brings on the important part about that these companies don't care that they're making addicting. They're doing it on purpose. They're making their platforms addicting. And the youth, the younger kids that are growing up, are now faced with a huge problem that is they can't get the phones away. They can't get the phones away from their faces. It's just like they need to be on it. And I remember in the documentary, The Social Dilemma or whatever, they're talking about how they designed all these apps. So like if you're on Pinterest or whatever, you see half of the next image because you want to see the next one. So of course you're going to swipe up and you're going to keep going and going. And like you said with Facebook, they're going to recommend you things that you're going to click on or that you're going to share or talk about because they know that'll keep you on the app longer. And there's just nobody there to say, hey, this is bad. The generation growing up is going to be tainted almost because of these companies just want more money, and the younger generation is going to provide that for them.
Yeah, there's a book called Persuasive Technology that should probably be in the forbidden section, if you will, that basically of the library that talks about how to do that. It's basically taking psychology and using it to drive engagement in your application. So that random reward, that thing where you scroll and getting the likes, it's a little dopamine hit when you get a like. That's designed to be that way on purpose. And we're all subject to that. We all want to have that little dopamine hit. I get on Reddit and I scroll through the cute puppy dogs before I go to bed on the Awe forum. And I enjoy that, but I have to limit my time because otherwise 2 or 3 hours later, I'm found I haven't got anything done except for looking at cute puppy dogs. Right?
Yeah. How do you fix that though for the younger generation? Where does technology, there has to be a line drawn, whether it's parenting or whatever, the responsibility of these companies, but how do you solve that going forward for these younger kids that are growing up and that's all they know is a phone since the age of 5 or however young kids are getting them nowadays, 6, 7 years old, when that's all they know is of technology in their hands since they were a baby?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we certainly need to, enforce the current laws. So right now, anybody less than 13 can't really have one of these accounts without parental consent. I've heard that as many as half of every kid that's under 12 has a social media account of some sort because they can just lie on who they are. I think it's disturbing when I talk to a detective here in the cybercrimes task force. She talks about how these young kids are groomed often by sexual predators on these online forums, and then that often can lead to a sex crime of some sort. And so she doesn't think that anybody under 18 needs to have any technology. And I think she makes a good argument for it. Some people say, well, my kid needs to learn about technology. Well, my mom is 89 and just learned how to use an iPad. Okay. If she can learn it, your kid can learn it when they're 18.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
It's not going to be that hard for them to learn how to use an iPad.
Uh-huh. Oh, 100%. And that's a good point with the sexual predators online because, like you said, you get young people online and then they get in chat rooms or even on Facebook now. There are people on there that are trying to groom younger kids or anybody, and they make these fake accounts for people. And I even have people like that hit me up on Facebook, fake accounts all the time, try to add me as a friend. And, we've dealt with it a while, so we can go on the account and look, it was made yesterday, and all the pictures were added yesterday. Clearly, this isn't a real person. But how do you explain that to a 10-year-old kid that, no, this is not a real person. This is a predator trying to do something bad to you. That even makes it more scary. And maybe it's education at school that which I don't know if they're teaching that right now, but that might be a way going forward, is educating kids on the dangers of social media.
Yeah, and there's lots of other hidden dangers there too, right? So what you post is going to be there for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
We had a interesting situation at the university. There was a young woman, and this is a couple of years ago. She had a very unique name, and I'm blanking on it, and I wouldn't say it if I could even remember it, but not to use her name. But when she was like 12 or 13, she posted some, goofy comment about some boy she liked on some social media. And it was a social media that kind of died out, but Google had cached that and had been indexing that as the top hit for her name for like the last 10 years. Well,
Really?
she went to start to fill out job applications. Well, guess when people Google her name, what came up? So she had to drive this out of the top results. She created a blog. She would write every day in the blog. We had, different departments would link to the blog, so it would have more links to it and all this stuff to finally drive it off the front page of Google. And that, idea that anything you put out there is there for forever. And we've actually had examples here of students that were running for student council and then found that they had made some stupid drunken tweet, right? And then they said, okay, I'm going to resign as president of the student council because of this drunken tweet from 4 years ago or whatever.
And that's the scariest part right there, is the fact that you could say something, especially now with, like you mentioned, all these kids making accounts when they shouldn't be able to. They could put something on there that'll way down the line change their entire life, and they don't know the dangers of that. And that's the most important thing I think you could get across to them, is when you put something on the internet, it's always going to be on the internet. And
Right.
That's the scariest thing.
Yeah, when I was in high school, you said something stupid, you got called into the principal's office, maybe you had to do detention for 3 weeks, whatever it was.
Yep.
And maybe your classmates found out about it and you were embarrassed for a while, but the whole world didn't find out about it. It didn't affect you when you went to go to apply to a job. Right. So it's a different world today, and it's a dangerous one.
Yeah, 100%. I read on your thing also about how I don't know what the thing was, but did you predict that we'd be doing virtual classrooms? Did you predict the rise of Zoom? Can you kind of talk about that?
Well, I wish I could say that I predicted it all, but back in the 90s, I actually got involved in using two-way video conferencing for education. In that case, we weren't doing it into people's homes. We were actually linking small schools together. So if you're in a really small rural school district in Minnesota, actually Minnesota was at the forefront of this. I remember we took a trip up there to see some of the schools and what they had done in the late 80s, early 90s. And they would link these small rural school districts together so that if you had 4 students that needed a physics class in some school district A and 3 students in school district B, well, neither of school districts could afford to hire a physics teacher, but maybe one of them could, and then they could teach both classes. And so it was used amongst rural school districts for sharing different content. And that worked very well. And it allowed a lot of students to have access to education they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so we wrote a book about that in, I think, 96 called Virtual Classrooms. So yeah, it sounds like we were prophets to what is happening today. And I wish I could claim that I had the foresight to invest in Zoom 8 years ago, but not quite.
Is that how long Zoom's been around for now? 8 years? Wow.
Been around for quite a while, but it just took a while for them to, come about. The gentleman that created Zoom originally was one of the creators of WebEx and sold it to Cisco.
Mm.
And the day after his non-compete expired, where he couldn't compete with Cisco, he left and took a lot of the brilliant engineers with him and started Zoom.
Wow.
So it's been a long time coming.
And now during COVID, I bet they're seeing record high profits and everything with all the schools using them and all the government agencies and businesses. I mean, it is unbelievable how big they've gotten now. It's like you hear Zoom everywhere, and the
Yeah, it's
advertisements.
like Kleenex, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you don't say let's do a video conference, you say let's do a Zoom.
Yep,
right?
yep. That's unbelievable. Talk a little bit about how you mentioned earlier in the podcast, COVID has brought us forward a decade. Can you explain that? Because I can see parts of it, how, technology, people have had to really rely on technology during this, but kind of explain where you were headed with that.
Well, there's a number of areas we could point to. Look at something like online grocery delivery. Went from less than 1% to now like 20% is
Wow.
grocery delivery. I don't think it's going to go back after this. And in fact, I think we're going to see grocery stores maybe reimagining themselves to have some stores that will not even have people in them. Right. So they will just be the delivery only warehouses or distribution points. I think that's one area where we look at retail. I think that's going to change significantly, because going into a grocery store is not like an experience like going into a Nordstrom's or going into an Apple store. It's not the same thing. You're not there for partly that experience, right? So a grocery store is more utility in some ways. So I think that's one example. I think education is going to change dramatically as well. I think that we're going to find that, well, some of our courses do pretty well online. Some of our students do pretty well online. Other courses, maybe not so much. Maybe they are not amenable to this format. And certainly some students don't like it either. I have one student I got to see here about a month ago. It was a really small graduate class, so I invited him over to my backyard where we could socially distance. And she was so excited just to see somebody and to see him in person, and just went on and on for about a half an hour because she was just so excited to see everybody. And she does not like online. Meanwhile, I talked with another student the other day, and she's like, "Oh man, I love online. I hope it always stays online," because that works well for her.
Uh-huh.
And we all have different modes by which we learn the best. And I think we're going to start to see things change a little bit. We've been thinking about online education as changing, being a game changer for years. But I think we're going to start to see some real differentiation amongst different institutions that embrace it, or some that are really going to use it as a stopgap.
So you think even after this is all done, that a lot of the things that have changed during COVID are going to remain the same because people have gotten used to them over the last year?
Yeah, I think there's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to stay the same, or maybe we'll get a lot better. So for example, I saw a lot of the previews of what Zoom is going to be doing with their application, and they're going to have a lot of what they call zaps. So these are, it'll be another little button there, and you can integrate a lot of applications directly into Zoom without having to like go share your screen somewhere else. And so these are going to be really interesting ways for interaction. So right now, Zoom is kind of a stopgap measure in some ways for teaching, but I think we're going to see new modes coming out, maybe even using VR, maybe even using other types of audiovisual, AR, stuff like that, being able to blend these classes in some ways. So having multi-modes. So it may be nice that even when I'm back in the classroom to also be able to have Zoom and also be able to record. Right? So that way, students that maybe are shifted in location or in time can attend that class. So that's going to lead to some interesting things as far as how higher education institutions get along or don't get along with each other.
Yeah.
How they compete. We sometimes compete in bad ways. So we compete because we're elitist, right? So if you apply and you might be successful here, but we reject you, well, that makes us better, right, in the ranking. So because we have rejected more high quality students. Well,
Yeah.
if you ask me, that's a bunch of BS.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you allow swearing on this
Oh yeah, you can say
podcast,
whatever you
but
want.
I would say a lot more on that. But I think education, we need more education. We need it more often, and we need it in more different ways. And so I could even see a situation where, well, maybe we have a great professor at NYU that can teach management, and that professor, um, teaches, broadcasts out their lectures and their course. And then uh, maybe we wouldn't call it a TA, but essentially the role of a TA. And I have a small cohort of students that I work with and that I help mentor. And so maybe we're going to see different models like that. And this is going to be the way that some of these institutions can reach out and can reach thousands of people. Right now, we have these things called MOOCs, or massive online open courses. I think that's what they're called, where you can enroll in MIT or Stanford courses, but there's not that kind of personal touch. So why don't we combine the best lectures, the best course content with a personal touch, right? So maybe I will have a class of 12, but we're also all listening to the lectures from Stanford or Harvard or NYU.
Should that be cheaper to do online? Because I've heard a lot of people complain that their tuition is being used for online. Same amount, maybe they got a little bit off, but they're paying a lot of money to not even be there, and the teachers don't have to be in the school. They can be wherever. And I've had a lot of friends complain about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's mixed. One, we weren't exactly planning to be online.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, we're all dealing with what's hopefully a once in a lifetime situation. We're trying to get through it. It's not ideal, but we're trying to do the best we can. The second thing is, I think higher education has shifted the burden to students with tuition. So if you look at not only what the students are paying in the student loans. By the way, student loans are the only type of debt that cannot be forgiven in bankruptcy. Okay. And a lot of students don't know that. Also, there was a report out this week that looked at how much debt parents are taking on. Okay. And so they're often taking on debt to send their kid to college, to the best college they can get into. It turns out that for an undergraduate degree, your trajectory after college, if you go into a huge amount of debt, and let's say that you can go to some school like Berkeley for your undergrad versus going to Missouri State University down Springfield, your outcome is not going to be determined by where you went. Okay, it's actually probably going to be better. What I'm trying to say is that you don't get a raise in income that reflects the raise in tuition.
Yeah.
Right.
That's interesting.
So don't overspend on your undergraduate.
Yeah. And do you think, another question, do you think this online, everybody online, Zoom and everything, do you think we're going to have a generation of socially awkward people from not having the face-to-face interactions that maybe you were used to growing up, where there was no such thing as video conferencing or online stuff like that? Do you think that people are going to be more uncomfortable being around people and making those face-to-face interactions with all the social media, and then combining that with Zoom for everything at work, school, church, whatever you're doing?
I don't know. Talking with my students, what they tell me is that a lot of their social media is using things like Snapchat, and they do it more to text one-on-one. So it seems like they have a fair number of one-on-one friends. It seems like these communication tools have allowed them to transition and keep their friends from high school as they go through college. Because frankly, I graduated high school, and I saw like two of my friends that were on the same campus I went to, and that was it. I don't really, every once in a while I get some reunion thing to find out what happened to them, but I didn't really continue that relationship. I had to start over. So maybe some of these technologies are good. Maybe they're helping them maintain relationships over a long term. I would have to ask my students. I try not to assume things for them
Yeah.
because it's pretty clear I'm not part of that generation anymore.
That is a good point, though, with the Snapchat and texting, because I'm assuming now if you wanted to get a hold of your high school, college buddies, you'd probably have to pick up the phone and actually call them, which is beyond some people my age. That's just not an option when you can actually Snapchat them. Why would you call somebody? What's the point of talking to them when you can just send them a picture, like you said, and then text on that? And that is,
Right.
for me and Colin, obviously, our generation, Snapchat is a huge thing and a valuable tool for keeping friendships that we had when we were younger or in high school or whatever. That's an interesting point, though. I never thought about that compared to the alternative,
Yeah.
which is, I don't know, it just seems like people our age don't want to talk as much or like have the face-to-face interactions or.
Yeah, I think it may be something with like planning out what you're going to say, something like that. It's kind of funny because I give my cell phone number to all my students. So I have like 650 students. Well, so I say, you can text me, you can call me. I've never gotten a call from a student. But I don't really like texting. Okay. It's not what I do. My generation did email, but I text them because that's where the students are at. Well, it's kind of hilarious because when I first started doing this, I would get these long texts and I would be like, well, I don't want to type all that in. So I just call the person. And they would just like freak out. They'd be like, Professor. And so after about the third time of this, I was mentioning this to my niece and she's like, don't call him. For God's sakes, do not call them.
If my college professor was calling me, I'd be like, wait a minute, what's going on? That's funny, though. But that's, like you said, that's what you were accustomed to. And isn't it weird how as technology changes, so do our customs that we're so used to? How things that were normal to you when you were growing up are now almost alien to younger people because it's just not the way things are done anymore. Like for our people our age, like that's just crazy to me that even not that far apart, think of 100 years from now, how big of a difference things are going to be then from where we are now. But we're talking a 10, 20 year period and things have changed that much. Like that blows me away.
Right. Yeah. And so that's why I tell my other people that are entering teaching, I said, don't assume anything. You need to ask the students,
Yep.
What are their lives like? So that's one of the questions I ask them is, what should I know about your life? And so you find out that, what they're dealing with, what they're struggling with, how they're trying to navigate this COVID crisis. So you find out that students are doing a lot. They're not lazy. They may have very different priorities than my generation does, but they are definitely involved and engaged and interested in the future.
Speaking of the future, another question I have for you was, do you think in our lifetime, maybe maybe even very coming soon, that we'll get rid of paper cash, we'll get rid of coins, everything will be a digital currency, whether on a phone or a card, whatever. Do you think we'll get to that point?
I don't know. It's interesting. I was listening to some folks that were talking about cryptocurrencies like a Bitcoin and not using it as a currency per se, but more as an asset, like almost like a stock that you'd hold on to, or like gold as an asset. I think we're going to see that with, Apple Pay and Google Pay and those types of applications. But I think it's going to be some time before cryptocurrencies become common, or at least a cryptocurrency that's not pegged to the dollar, because the fluctuations are just too much. You just can't accept, you can't, let's say that I'm a grocery store, which makes like 2 to 3%, and I accept Bitcoin. Well, 2 minutes later, Bitcoin goes down by 3%. Well, now I'm losing money on you buying milk.
Yep.
Right. So that's not going to work out so well.
Do you think that things with the Apple Pay, though, would that be considered like a digital currency, Apple Pay, or is that just a bank account hooked up
Yeah,
to.
that's just a different way to transact still in U.S. currency.
Okay, but the cryptocurrency is almost like you said, like a stock. I'm not too familiar actually with Bitcoin or anything. I've never used it before. So, what are the benefits to using Bitcoin other than and is it anonymous? Is that correct?
It's like cash in some ways, so it's anonymous. So that's good and bad, right? So I can give you $1 and you maybe don't know who it's from or you can't trace who it came from, as opposed to us doing electronic transfer. Now that can be good and bad. So let's say I give you $1, or let's say I give you $100 to buy some pizzas for us tonight, and you just run off and I never see you again. Well, I can't go to the Federal Reserve and say, hey, that, Ethan guy took my $100. I want my $100 back. But if I had used MasterCard and you were some sort of business, you were an Uber Eats driver, and you never came back with the pizzas, I could call up MasterCard and say, hey, this was a fraudulent transaction, and they would give me my money back. So there's good and bad things about it. Of course, you probably have heard of people losing their Bitcoin. They don't actually lose the Bitcoin, they lose a key to get access to it. And so there have been cases where somebody has thrown away an old phone, and that was when Bitcoin was worth $1 per coin, and now it's $20,000 per coin. And they realize there's $3 million if I can just get that key to unlock it. And so they're out in the New Jersey landfill, trying to find their old phone. And this has actually happened.
Wow.
So I don't know. I think there's also kind of a whole subculture that's grown up around cryptocurrencies and people that, want to stick it to the government, and also the use of these cryptocurrencies in the so-called dark web to purchase illegal substances is tainted the whole field in some ways.
Yeah, and my dad was actually the one that was asking me. He's like, I've heard about this Bitcoin, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around what else you'd use it for than buying illicit online drugs or whatever, because he knew it was anonymous. I'm trying to figure out too, what would the benefit be of using Bitcoin rather than money out of your own bank account, or unless you were trying to do something illegal that you didn't want the government to know about. Why is the value gone up from $1 to $20,000? Why are people using it?
It's just speculation, and it's something that you can't produce more of. That's another. It only gets produced at a certain rate, so it's a limited quantity, and so it doesn't really fit the definition of a currency in a lot of ways. But some people like it because you can't produce more of it. So like I said, this whole kind of subculture, anti-government sentiment around Bitcoin is like, well, the government can't produce more of it, and so that's a good thing. They can't manipulate monetary policy. It has been used for remittances. That's probably one of the big ways that it is used. So let's say that I'm here in Columbia, Missouri, but I also have relatives in Panama, and I need to send them some money every month. So I'm working here and I'm sending them money back home. Well, if I go to Western Union, they're going to take a cut of all that, right? And there might be somebody outside the Western Union office down there waiting to rob them. And so what I'm going to do instead is I'll transfer my dollars into Bitcoin. The Bitcoin then goes down there, and then it gets translated in local currency really quickly, and then they can have access to it. And so that's one of the ways that some of these cryptocurrencies are being used, but they're used in a very fast transaction.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no time for the money to go up and down.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I guess I really don't know too much about Bitcoin at all. But this is the final episode that we're doing for 2020, because this will come out tomorrow. And so
Excellent.
This will be the final episode. And so my question for you is, now that we know everything that happened in 2020, well, maybe unless some other crazy stuff happens, I wouldn't be too surprised at this rate. What are your predictions for AI and technological advances in 2021? Because I thought this would be kind of fun we're going into the new year. What are your thoughts of what we're going to see? Maybe you've heard about some developing technologies. What do you think we're going to see in 2021?
Okay, well, I want to come back in a year from now, and I want to sound like a genius. So I'm going to make some really extreme predictions.
Awesome.
Here.
Yeah,
so,
I'm excited.
Self-driving cars.
Really?
There will be self-driving cars. Each one of us will have seen or have ridden in a self-driving car.
Wow.
Okay?
It's going to come that far in 2021.
So it's going to come that far. Those little Boston Dynamics dogs. You ever seen those little robots that look kind of like dogs? Those are going to be deployed to as security. So we're going to start to see those deployed instead of little, privates with their guns around military bases. We'll start to see those little dogs running around, those little robot dogs running around.
Wow.
We will start to see delivery by drone. We'll actually start to have that. There will be the first Amazon order that will be ordered by an Amazon Prime member, and it will be delivered by drone. Okay, so I'll make that prediction. I'll predict that AIs will get so good at writing student papers that they will beat the plagiarism software that we have.
Don't tell your students about that one. That might be one to avoid.
They already know. Believe me.
Wow.
So right now, it can only write a paper that the plagiarism software can still detect it. It still says that 60% has been plagiarized, but I'm predicting by the end of the year that will be down to 0.
Wow. That's a big one. That's a huge one.
Actually, I have a PhD student that's studying AI and its use in language, and about every month he updates me, and it just blows me away.
Really?
So I think that's actually probably the prediction most likely to be true.
Huh. Any others that you think? Those are all very bold and exciting too.
So an AI song, a pop music song in the US in the top 10 will be written by an AI.
Wow. And sung by an AI too, or just written by an AI? Like, will a robot actually be the one? Because I know they're doing robot like deep fake.
No, I think it'll just be written by it.
Written by it.
So it'll be like a formulaic boy band, right? So it'll be like, we're gonna get 5 random guys, and we're gonna get this computer to write a bunch of songs for them.
In Sync, the robot edition.
Yes, exactly. So I predict that.
Wow, these are really good predictions. Actually, we're gonna have the video, so we'll have to have you back on in a year to see how much of your predictions actually came true.
Excellent. I would enjoy that.
And my last question for you today, Scott, this is a new thing we're doing. We're asking every one of our guests if you could go back and tell your 21-year-old self something. What would that be? Just one thing. If you could go back, and you could think about it for a second here, if you have just one thing that in your life that, or in, over your professional career, anything, if you could just go back and tell your 21-year-old self something, what would that be?
I guess there would be 2 things. One is read more, and the second would be say yes.
Say yes. Wow. I like that one a lot. I don't think there's enough young people that are willing to, the guy we had on last time said take risks too. So that was kind of the same thing. People are afraid.
When you get older, you regret the things you didn't try, right?
Wow. Those are both really great. And thank you so much, Scott, for coming on. This has been awesome. I definitely learned a lot. Colin, I don't know about you.
I've been learning.
And I love the predictions.
Consuming the whole time.
He's been consuming over there. So I want to thank you, Scott, for coming on here. I will have a link to. Do you have a website, or do you have anywhere where you post your stuff? YouTube channel, anything like that?
Yeah. I've got a website. I'll send it to you, christensenjs.com. I'm actually redoing it a little bit over the break, but you can find me there. Also, if you go to frt.news, I have a little newsletter called Free Range Technologist that I send out, and it's just books I've been reading, resources I've been finding, news about AI stuff. So if people want to find things there. I also have a website that's called learnabout.ai, and it's got some different applications, different places that'll point you to where you can learn about AI.
Awesome. Well, we'll give me those links, and we'll put those in the description. Anyone listening can check those out. I just want to thank you, Scott, for coming on. This has been really fun. Learned a lot, because I don't know a lot about this topic at all. So that's why I wanted to get you on here, because I knew the viewers and everyone listening could be interested and definitely learn something. And now we have something to look forward to in the future. We're all going to be in a self-driving car, hopefully within the next couple months here.
Self-driving car will be jamming out to the latest AI tunes.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, Scott, really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to having you back on and figuring out how many of these predictions came forward and came true.
All right, excellent.
All right, well, that was a great conversation with Scott, professor at University of Missouri. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about AI, and talking about COVID and everything. It's interesting to see what's going to happen here in the future if we're actually going to stay doing the things that we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like they really talk about the new normal. He wasn't messing around. He really thinks that this is the new normal for technology.
It could be, I don't know, Kathy, one of my managers at my restaurant, said she thinks COVID is going to be kind of like 9/11, where it has like a lot of impacts on our country.
Oh, yeah.
From like national security changing and increasing a lot with 9/11. This is going to have a lot to do with like safety, like cleaning and
oh yeah,
stuff like that, you know, like
yep.
social distancing, people wearing masks. Who knows how long that's going to go on for.
Oh yeah, but specifically in the vein of what he's talking about, how schools are going to do a lot more online and work, and then he's talking about grocery stores and stuff like that. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, who knows if people are ever going to go back to the office again, or if schools are ever going to be in person again, or I'm sure they will, but maybe not all the classes.
Even Dad said that at work they're going to probably keep doing Zoom meetings because then everybody doesn't have to drive to the one store. And I was even kind of blown away by that. I figured everyone would be excited to get back to being in person and doing stuff, but every day it's starting to seem like that less and less of chances that going to happen, you know?
Yeah,
so,
crazy world.
It is. And that was awesome talking to him. I learned a lot, and I'm excited, like I said before, about the predictions because he obviously reads about AI every day, and he learns about it and hears stuff that we'll never know about just from doing all of his research. So I'm excited to see if his predictions actually come true, especially since he was doing virtual classrooms back in the 80s, 90s, whatever, you know, and then now virtual classrooms is a huge thing. So, you know, he has a credibility, and he, you know, being a professor, I take, you know, what he says and I believe him. So very exciting stuff. Next week, we're going to have Terry Rich on. I'm not even going to say much about him because I want to leave it a surprise, but you can look that up. Terry Rich is going to be on, going to be a great guest. Thank you, Colin, for producing this one. We'll be back next week. This is the Ethan Clerc Podcast Show.
Objects.
Agreed. And then, yeah, I remember.
It's not even the shape.
Negative.
Mentally ill. A special effects agency.